Hi, I'm Carter. My sister slapped me in front of the entire company and called me a pathetic freeloader. My parents? They laughed, said I deserved it, for being a burden. But none of them knew. I was the majority shareholder. I'd been the silent backbone of everything they built. And when they crossed the line for the last time, I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I simply raised a paper and watched the people who once humiliated me fall to their knees. What would you have done if the ones who raised you were the first to betray you? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this? And where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. I pushed through the revolving glass doors like I had 100 mornings before, my ID badge slapping lightly against my chest. Greaves Family Holdings, big name, bigger money, coldest damn place I've ever belonged to. Not that anyone in the lobby seemed to think I did belong. The receptionist barely lifted her eyes from her screen. A security guard nodded faintly at the mail guy, but didn't even glance in my direction. It stung, but I'd learned how to hide that. In my hand was a folder, thick, finalized, and worth nearly $18 million in projected savings. It was the South Expansion contract, the one Darcy had been assigned, forgotten about, and would have fumbled into a lawsuit if I hadn't stepped in. No thanks needed. I wasn't expecting applause. I just wanted to hand it over and keep the company from falling apart. Again. The heels came before the voice. Sharp, confident clicks echoing down the corridor like they owned the marble floors. Darcy Greaves, my older sister, strutted past like some queen of Midtown. Two assistants flanked her like trained shadows. As she passed me, she accidentally bumped my shoulder hard enough to knock the folder loose from my grip. It slapped against the floor. She didn't stop. Just tossed her hair and muttered, "God, watch where you're loitering." I bent to pick it up. 6 employees saw. No one said anything. By the time I reached her just outside the elevator bank, her entourage had paused, forming a half circle like some executive fan club. I held the folder out to her calmly. "South Expansion. Final revisions are done," I said. She took the folder, glanced at it, then looked at me like I'd just spit on her shoes. "You finished my contract?" I nodded once. "You asked me to, last week." "I didn't ask," she snapped. "I delegated." She looked around, saw the little crowd forming near the admin desks, and smirked. Then, without warning, she slapped me, right across the face. It wasn't just the sting of skin on skin. It was the silence that followed. The sharp inhale from someone behind the reception counter. The unmistakable click of a phone camera shutter. The cold hum of the AC. "You pathetic freeloader," she hissed, low enough for only me and the nearest few to hear. "You're lucky Dad lets you breathe on this property." I stood there, my jaw burning. Every part of me told me to say something. Scream, throw the folder at her feet, demand she tell everyone who really handled the contracts around here. But I didn't. I turned away, jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a molar. And then I saw her. My mother, Tanya Greaves, in her pristine cream pantsuit, holding her daily lemon water like it was a prop in some billionaire's lifestyle magazine. She was walking by just as I turned. She paused, took in the scene, and smirked, a knowing, venom-laced smile. "Serves you right," she said softly. "You useless burden." She kept walking. Dad followed close behind, silent as always. But the look in his eyes, it was satisfaction. Like he'd just watched a dog get punished for chewing the wrong shoe. They didn't need to raise their voices. They'd already buried me beneath them years ago. I kept walking. The hallway blurred slightly as I made my way to the elevators. Not from tears, I hadn't cried in years, but from the pressure of holding everything in. There was a junior staffer near the break room, someone from legal, I think, who paused as I passed. "Mr. Greaves, are you okay?" I didn't answer right away, just nodded slightly. "I'm fine," I said. but it sounded like someone else's voice. I stepped into the elevator, alone. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of my father. He was smiling. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about being ignored. This wasn't about being a footnote in the Greaves family empire. They needed me gone. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and felt the small manila envelope I'd carried every day for nearly 3 years. Inside was my grandmother Odella's final letter, the real will, the sealed clause no one else knew existed. The one that gave me 72% of Greaves family holdings, and I hadn't used it, not because I was weak, but because I still loved them. Because deep down I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd learn to see me, to acknowledge that I wasn't the intern anymore, that I'd grown this company in the background, long after they stopped looking. But that morning, in that lobby, with a slap echoing in my ears and a camera lens catching my humiliation, I knew they would never choose me. So I would choose something else. My voice. I didn't head straight to my office. Instead, I took the elevator to the 10th floor, past the executive suites, past the glass walls and carefully curated artwork meant to make the Greaves empire look modern and untouchable. At the far end of the hallway, I keyed into a conference room I knew was rarely used. It was quiet, the blinds drawn, the long mahogany table stretching into shadows. I locked the door behind me. The air was colder here, still, like even the HVAC system respected secrets. I took a seat at the far end of the table, let out a slow breath, and reached into my jacket. The manila envelope came out as it always had, carefully, reverently. It was worn now. The edges softened from handling, but the seal was intact and the contents unchanged. I opened it. Inside, her handwriting greeted me like a whisper from a safer time. Faint, but deliberate. This company bears our name, not theirs. I could hear her voice, my grandmother, Odella. Tougher than leather, sharper than half the men who sat on our board. She taught me how to read financial statements by the time I was 13, had me highlight mergers and redline purchase agreements while other kids were still memorizing state capitals. I know what they've done to you. My throat tightened. I could still feel the pressure of her hug that final summer, the way she'd hold me a second longer, her hands calloused from years of work, but always warm. That's why I left you the legacy, because you won't destroy it, but you'll protect it when the time comes. I closed my eyes. The letter always did this, shook something loose in me I didn't like showing. She hadn't just seen me. She believed in me, in ways my own father never had, in ways Darcy would never understand. And that belief, it haunted me as much as it held me up. I set the letter aside, booted up my laptop, and plugged in the encrypted drive. The login screen pulsed. 2-factor authentication. Retinal scan. Then, access. I navigated to the hidden folder I'd buried 3 years ago, titled G12 Silent Transfer. Her clause was right where I'd left it, ironclad, untouched, and terrifying. 72% ownership of Greaves family holdings, transferred quietly through a sealed provision in her trust. Public record wouldn't know until the seal expired. And that deadline? 7 days from now. I leaned back, heart pounding, not with fear, but something closer to disbelief. For years I'd carried the weight of this, unsure when, or even if, I'd ever use it. I could walk into the boardroom today and end it all. Fire them, freeze the accounts, flip the locks on every power game they'd ever played. But I didn't move. Because truth be told, a part of me still wanted them to choose me without force, to see me, not because I had leverage, but because I mattered, as their daughter, as their sister, as a person. And wasn't that the most dangerous hope of all? My eyes drifted to the envelope again. The last time I saw Odella was at the farmhouse in McKinney, the day of her funeral. I remember arriving early, slipping in quietly. They'd put me in the back, near the exit. Darcy turned around, gave me that icy little smirk, and said, "You were never her real granddaughter. Just a charity case Mom picked up." She always said it like I was some stray Odella had fed once and couldn't get rid of. I didn't argue. Dad never even glanced my way that day. He sat stone-faced, next to Tanya, both of them dressed to perfection. Not a trace of grief, not even the decency to acknowledge the woman who raised them both up from ruin. But I remembered. I remembered the way Odella kept one worn photo of me and her on her desk, me at 10, toothy grin, her hands on my shoulders. I remembered her saying, "They'll need you more than you'll ever need them." And now, here we were. I clicked through the file logs. One document, labeled Contingency A2, made my stomach drop, a forgery scan. 2 years ago, Darcy had tried to override the ownership clause, using falsified signatures. The scan flagged it immediately. My attorney had notified me quietly. I'd buried the incident, told myself it wasn't worth stirring up family shame. That was the day I learned silence isn't loyalty, it's surrender. I minimized the window, my hands resting on the keyboard. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the overhead lights. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I folded the manila envelope again, slowly, precisely, and slipped it back into my inner pocket. Over my heart. A new habit. A reminder. That envelope wasn't just a document. It was power, truth, and maybe, finally, permission. Permission to stop begging for a place at the table. I stood, grabbed my blazer from the chair, and walked toward the door. Just as my hand touched the knob, the intercom crackled to life. "Carter Greaves, please report to the boardroom. Effective immediately." I froze. That was my father's voice, and he hadn't said my name out loud in years. I took a slow breath and stepped forward. The boardroom door swung open with a soft hiss. They were already waiting. Darcy sat at the head of the table, her legs crossed, her fingers drumming lightly on the polished oak surface. She didn't look up, just kept tapping, like this was just another routine meeting, like this wasn't war. My father stood by the window, arms crossed, his back ramrod straight. He didn't acknowledge me either. Not right away. Tanya, always the perfect show pony, was leafing through a thick folder, lips pursed like she was judging the font choice, and the rest? Board members lined both sides of the table. Most looked uncomfortable. A few wouldn't meet my eyes. One or two gave me small, apologetic glances, fleeting but telling. "Carter," my father said at last, still staring out over the Dallas skyline. "Sit." I assume there's a reason I was called without warning, I said, calm and measured. "This wasn't on the schedule." Tanya chuckled under her breath. "Schedules change." Darcy finally looked up. Her eyes were bright, gleaming with something between triumph and cruelty. My father turned from the window. "We'll get straight to it. There have been some concerns." "Concerns?" I repeated, taking the seat furthest from Tanya. "Let's hear them." Tanya slid the folder across the table with a crisp flick. "Anonymous audit," she said. "Came in last week. Preliminary findings flagged irregular data transfers in your department. Unusual client communication patterns. Potential violations of internal protocol." I flipped the folder open. Charts, screenshots, fabricated logs, sloppy work, dressed up in legal padding. "This is fake," I said flatly. Darcy leaned forward. "Is it?" I glanced at her. "You want to tell me what this is really about, or should I pretend we're all confused for a few more minutes?" "You're reckless," she said, her voice coated in a false calm. "You've always been reckless. That whole tech savant image, it was tolerable when it helped us. But now, it's a liability." "A liability?" I said slowly. "For who?" "For this family, for the firm," Tanya snapped. "You've been meeting with clients behind our backs, undermining deals. playing fast and loose with data access. I looked around the room. No one spoke. You think I'd do that? I asked. We don't think anything, my father said, voice cold. We have proof. Darcy raised her phone. Recording, of course. That smug glint in her eye said it all. You should have left years ago, she said, tone light. We let you stay out of pity. But now you're endangering the brand. You don't belong in this world, Carter. There it was. I sat back in my chair. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. My hands stayed still on the table. I let them talk. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd seen this move coming a year ago. The fake audit, the setup, the smear, and they were playing it exactly as predicted. I'd like legal representation before this proceeds further, I said, tone even. Tanya rolled her eyes. There's nothing to sign. You're done, my father added, voice harder now. It's over. I nodded slowly. Then I'll need a full copy of this meeting's minutes, for my records. That landed. Tanya stiffened. One of the board members, Tom Galloway, the CFO, shifted in his seat and looked toward the far wall, like he didn't want to be seen reacting. That was the first crack. I looked directly at him, just for a second. He didn't meet my eyes, but that was enough. They were nervous. I reached for the folder again, flipped through 2 pages, then closed it gently. My fingers brushed the inside of my blazer, where the manila envelope rested, warm against my chest like a heartbeat. Still there. Still waiting. I pushed back from the table. We're not done, Tanya barked. I think we are, I said, standing. No one walks out on this board, my father growled. Not when we're talking about breach of trust. I paused, looked at him, not angry, just tired. You mean your trust, not mine, never mine. And then I turned to leave. My hand reached the doorknob. That's when he said it. By Monday, you'll be completely out. Trust me. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because I believed them, but because I recognized the tone. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. I didn't turn around. But inside, something cracked. Not fear, not regret, but the final splinter of hope I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I shut the door behind me and let the silence swallow the last of their voices. No more shouting, no more accusations, no more pretending. My apartment felt smaller than usual that night, or maybe I just felt bigger, heavier with what I knew, what they didn't, what they would soon regret. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. I moved through the shadows, past the muted glow of the streetlights outside the windows, until I reached my kitchen table. There, a single lamp cast a soft amber circle across a sea of papers, folders, and legal binders stacked 3 high. The air smelled faintly of old cardboard, dust, and the bitter edge of truth left too long sealed. I sat down and opened my laptop. It hummed softly to life, the screen glowing against the dark. I pulled the manila envelope from my bag and placed it on the table like it was sacred, because to me, it was. Her handwriting was still clear on the outside. Neat. Unhurried. For Carter only. Open when it's time. I already knew what was inside. I'd memorized every line the first time I read it, but tonight, it was time to let it breathe again. I opened it gently and slid the documents out. At the top, the sealed copy of Odella Greaves's final will, notarized and countersigned by Greaves Holdings' own counsel, the same one who now quietly played golf with my father on Fridays and golfed his ethics into the dirt. I scrolled through my hard drive and found the duplicate digital file, identical. I plugged in a USB drive, the one I'd labeled only with a single black star, and began copying everything. Meeting minutes, voting logs, transfer approvals, every signature, every date, every lie. And then, I found it again. buried in a supplemental addendum from 3 years ago, signed and filed in a moment of arrogance they must have thought would never matter. Upon the 3rd anniversary of my passing, 72% of all voting shares in Greaves Family Holdings are to be held in full by Carter J. Greaves, regardless of current title, employment, or familial standing. Legally binding, irrevocable, bulletproof. I sat back in my chair. My breath left me slow, controlled. They signed it. Darcy, Tanya, my father. They signed it under the belief that it could be renegotiated, that I'd stay quiet, that I'd stay grateful for the scraps. They never thought I'd go looking, never thought I'd be capable of more than coding and compliance. But I remembered what Odella once told me. I could still see her across the dinner table that spring night. Her blue sapphire earrings shimmered beneath the chandelier light. She had a way of making you feel like nothing could hide in her presence. I'd been stressing about my ethics final. She poured me chamomile tea, touched my wrist and said, "Don't ever trade truth for belonging, Carter, especially not with people who only value your silence." She didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because she knew. She always knew. Outside, traffic whispered past. I rubbed my eyes, then pulled up my email. To attorney@dwyermills.com. To trust manager at Ashland Private Trust. To lfreeman@investigatewest.org. 3 recipients. 1 lawyer. 1 trustee. 1 investigative journalist I once worked with when I uncovered a falsified charity network in Dallas. He owed me a favor. Or maybe, like me, he just hated seeing power used to erase people. I wrote the subject line carefully. Enclosed legal documents, Odella Greaves Estate and Board. Discrepancy. Attached, signed copy of Clause 4.6c. Board acknowledgement records. Statement of interest from minority shareholders. Copy of sealed will, encrypted backup of full legal file. Then I set the encryption timer. 48 hours. Delay release. Password protected. If anything happened to me, the lock would lift. I was triple-checking the links when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. But then I saw the name. Jonah Fine. Old friend. Harvard roommate. Minor shareholder. One of the few people left I trusted. I picked up. "Jonah." "Carter," he said, his voice low, quick. "You good?" "I'm fine. For now." He let out a breath. "I heard something. Tanya's meeting with the Mitchell brothers this weekend. Off the books. It's not just about freezing you out. They're trying to call an emergency vote. Override clauses. Strip your proxy rights. They can't override Clause 4.6c. They'll try to claim it was misrepresented or that it was filed under duress. They're scrambling, Carter, and they're scared." "Good." He paused. "Listen, if you're gonna hit back, you have to do it before Monday. If they beat you to it, they'll bury the entire clause behind so much litigation you'll be 50 before it sees daylight." I stared out my window. Across the skyline, Greaves Tower blinked like a cold lighthouse. Their name, her name, still lit up like nothing had changed. "I'm already ahead of them," I said. "Thanks for the heads up, Jonah." He hesitated. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "No," I said. "But I have to." After we hung up, I leaned forward and placed the manila envelope back on the table. My fingers lingered on the seal. It was her seal, pressed in soft blue wax. The old family emblem. She used to sign letters to me with it, even when she didn't have to. Trust wasn't a word she used lightly. I thought I'd feel power in this moment, like I'd finally won something. But all I felt was hollow. Like I was finally holding the truth and still somehow losing the family that should have loved me. But maybe I never had them to begin with. All I had was her. And that was enough. I clicked Schedule Send. Monday, 9:01 a.m. 3 recipients. 3 knives to cut through their lies. Let them meet. Let them plot. I wasn't the one cornered anymore. There was a soft knock at my door. Not a buzz, not a ring. Just 2 knocks. I almost didn't answer it. I was still in sweats, mug of half-warm coffee in my hand, the light outside still soft and gray like the day hadn't made up its mind yet. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Just a white envelope, no name, no return address, slid under my doormat like it belonged there. My first thought was, junk mail. But then I saw my name. Handwritten, in red ink. I picked it up slowly, a tightness forming in my chest I couldn't explain yet. I brought it inside and sat down at the kitchen table where the folder from last night still sat. The moment I opened the envelope, the air in the room changed. It was a photo. Me, kneeling beside Odella's grave. The date scrawled on the back in that same red ink, circled twice. April 14th. That was the exact day I first reached out to our former counsel about the sealed clause. I stared at it for a long moment. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. This wasn't a legal move. This was personal. There was no note, no threat written out. But it didn't need one. The message was loud and clear. We're watching you. I scanned the photo again. It wasn't taken from across the cemetery. No grainy zoom, no blurred fence line. The angle. It was close. Too close. Like someone had stood behind the tree I parked beside. Someone who knew I'd be there. Someone who knew why I'd be there. And there was only one group of people who would have known what that day meant to me. Family. Or someone they'd paid. Suddenly, that little smirk Darcy gave me yesterday made sense. It wasn't about the board. It wasn't about control. It was confidence backed by surveillance. I pushed the photo away and pulled out my phone. I was supposed to meet Jonah for brunch. He picked the place last week, even made a reservation at some overpriced farm-to-table spot he swore I'd like. But this wasn't the time for mimosas and duck hash. I texted him quickly. Change of plans. Meet me at Quinn Park, downtown. 11 a.m. sharp. It's urgent. Then I added, don't reply, just show up. He'd understand. By 10:15, I was already on the road. Dallas traffic hadn't fully woken up yet, which gave me room to think, to breathe, to go back through every recent move in my head. They weren't just fighting dirty, they were scared, desperate, and that made them sloppy. Emery Quinn's office sat on the 23rd floor of a steel and glass high-rise just west of the Arts District. She wasn't the type to decorate with leather-bound law books or ego photos from courtroom wins. Her lobby smelled like eucalyptus and money. Her assistant offered me a bottle of spring water and didn't blink when I handed over the envelope with the photo. She's waiting for you. Inside, Emery didn't smile. Didn't frown either. Just watched me with those sharp gray eyes, like she'd already read me top to bottom. Odella used to trust her. Had her handle the family's first round of trust revisions years ago, so I didn't waste time. I laid everything out. The sealed clause, the scanned board minutes, the voting rights, and now, the threat. She took it all in without interrupting once. Her fingers steepled beneath her chin as she studied the photo last. You didn't tell anyone you were going to the cemetery? No one. You think it's family? I think it's someone who wouldn't have snapped that photo unless they knew what it meant. She nodded slowly, then leaned back in her chair. You've done well keeping this under the radar, she said. No digital trail from the firm. No internal pings from the company servers. That was smart. You didn't alert their lawyers. That gives us time. Time for what? To flip the board before they bury you. She stood, walked to a file cabinet, and pulled out a slim folder. We can't sue them yet, not if we want to maintain your leverage. Right now you have the shares, but if we move too loud, they'll tie this up in litigation for years. What we need is precision. She drafted a cease and desist letter against the slanderous claims Darcy had floated about me last week. Nothing flashy, just a quiet, official reminder that their words had legal consequences. Then came the real move, a confidential letter addressed to each board member, carefully worded, ironclad proof of ownership transfer, highlighting the clause, the signatures, their own approvals from years back. It would arrive in their inboxes first thing Monday morning, courtesy of a law clerk who owed her a favor. Once that hits, Emery said, sliding the envelope back to me, they'll have no choice but to acknowledge you as majority owner. Whether they like it or not. I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing the corner of the photo again. Funny, I murmured. They never worried I'd walk away, just that I'd figure out how to stay. She tilted her head. Exactly. Something inside me shifted then. Not relief, not triumph, just a quiet steeliness I hadn't felt in years, like the part of me they tried to erase had found its footing again. I remembered something Odella once told me when I was 16 and spiraling after Tanya stole my internship credit and blamed it on a clerical error. She cupped my face, looked me in the eye and said, "Money is never quiet for long. The greedy always talk too loud." She was right. That photo, that wasn't strength, that was panic. They were talking too loud now. After we finished, Emery walked me to the elevator. "You're calm," she noted. "Should I not be?" "No, just be ready. People like your father, they don't go down clean." The elevator chimed open. I stepped in and turned back. I'm not looking for clean. I'm looking for truth. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the sidewalk as I walked back to my car. I slid into the driver's seat, placed the photo carefully back into the envelope, and then, without thinking, set it down next to Odella's sealed letter, the one I still hadn't moved from my dashboard. 2 pieces of paper. One, a threat. The other, justice. On the way home, traffic picked up. Horns, brakes, lights flickering red and green like the world didn't care who was being threatened and who was fighting back. I let it all blur. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window, watching the light fade off the buildings. The photo sat on the table, untouched. I didn't need to look at it again. Around 7, my phone buzzed with a message. From Darcy. "Hope you're enjoying your weekend, majority owner." There was no emoji. Just that single, smug sentence. I stared at it. Didn't reply. But by Sunday night, I had a plan they couldn't trace. Until it was too late. I parked behind the old bookstore on Maple, where the fluorescent sign had long stopped flickering and the back lot was lit by only a single, dim security light. The Sunday night air was still, thick with that early summer humidity Dallas never apologized for. My engine ticked softly as it cooled, the headlights off, windows down just enough to hear the cicadas rasping in the dark. A shape moved in the rearview mirror. Jonah. He slipped into the passenger seat without a word, ball cap pulled low, hoodie drawn tight like he didn't want to be seen, though he wasn't the one they were watching. I didn't look at him right away. Just reached for the bottled water between us and handed it to him. No labels, no questions. He took a sip, then silently handed me a thumb drive, followed by a thin manila folder. No clasp, no name, just information. "This is what you'll need," he said, his voice low. "They've been moving money out of the foundation, funneling it through Romer Hale since January. Shell companies, 3 layers deep." I didn't respond at first. I flipped the folder open and scanned the top page. There were transfer logs, signature mismatches, emails between Tanya and a financial liaison, coded but not well enough, even a flagged transaction labeled Community Growth Disbursement that never actually left the internal account. Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. They used Mom's name as a front. Again. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice steady. They think they're untouchable. Jonah didn't reply. We sat in silence, the kind that only exists between people who've known the same wound from opposite sides. I tapped the folder with my finger. Why now? His jaw tightened. Because I saw the photo. Ah. So Emery's envelope wasn't the only one in circulation. I should have known. You saw it? I asked. He nodded. Tanya had it printed. Left it on my desk. Said something about reminding you who really holds the pen. But that wasn't a warning. That was a mistake. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man who'd watched me get shoved aside at meeting after meeting, who'd said nothing when I was blamed for slowing down operations after Odella passed, who once asked me, half joking, half serious, if maybe I just didn't have the stomach for leadership. And now, he was here, handing me proof. Maybe people don't change overnight, but maybe fear wakes them up. I closed the folder, slid it into my tote, and turned the key in the ignition halfway, just enough to power the dash. I plugged the thumb drive in and waited. When the files loaded, I copied them to a secure cloud account tied to an LLC. I set up the same week Odella was buried. I didn't know what I'd use it for back then, but I knew I'd need it. I looked over at Jonah one more time. If this burns everything down, you ready for that? His mouth twitched into a tired smile. You think I've been sleeping well these past 2 years? Fair enough. We didn't say goodbye. He just slipped back out into the shadows, hands in his pockets, the weight of the whole thing settling on both of us now. I drove home on side streets, taking the long way, watching for headlights that followed too closely or cars that lingered too long at stop signs. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was wisdom. Back at my apartment, I locked the door behind me, set the folder on the counter, and pulled out my laptop. I didn't just read the files. I studied them, line by line, transfer by transfer, until my eyes ached and the numbers bled together, and as I worked, something surfaced, an old memory I hadn't touched in years. It was 2 years ago. I'd flagged a $150,000 donation that went missing from the Greaves Education Fund. I was naive back then, believed we were still doing good, that our family name meant something. I brought it up at the quarterly board meeting. Tanya laughed. She leaned back in her chair in front of all 12 members, patted me on the head and said, "You're cute for caring, but leave the real work to the big kids." Even Dad chuckled. I smiled back then, pretended I didn't hear the sneer under her words, but I remembered. And now I had the audit trail to prove she was the one who rerouted the donation to a personal investment fund out in Palm Beach. By 10:45, I was on a call with Emery. She didn't say much, just gave me the name of a forensic CPA Odella had once used during a quiet dispute over a former CFO. No paper trail, no direct invoice, completely independent. Within 20 minutes, I had encrypted the folder and sent it over with a private briefing. At the same time, Emery filed a sealed motion with a Dallas County judge to freeze all board activity until proper ownership could be verified. It would remain under seal until 9 a.m. Monday. Nobody would see it coming. Just before midnight, I opened my email and drafted a note. Subject: support needed for integrity. It was addressed to Valencia Cross, Odella's oldest friend. Our first ever HR director, the one Tanya pushed out after a disagreement over structure that was really about ethics. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I remembered what she told me once, back when I was 19 and struggling to make my voice heard at our summer internship reviews. She said, "They'll keep interrupting you until you make it impossible to ignore your presence." My message was short, just the facts. A quiet ask. By 12:07 a.m., her reply landed. "I'm in." No signature, no small talk, just enough. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. For years, they mocked me for being soft, for not raising my voice, for not slamming my fist on the table when Tanya erased my name from projects I led. They thought silence meant weakness, but silence can be preparation. Odella once said, "The loudest person in the room is usually the one with the least control." She was right. I never shouted, but I never stopped watching. At 11:59 p.m., I opened a secure browser, logged into the Department of Financial Oversight portal, and filled out the form. Entity name, supporting documents, anonymous submission. I hovered over the Submit button just a second longer, then I clicked. They thought I was just one person. They were about to meet the ghost of every single one they'd buried along the way. And when Monday came, the boardroom didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like Judgment Day. The elevators opened at exactly 8:58 a.m., and I stepped out into the 12th floor hallway of Greaves Sutton headquarters like I'd done 100 times before. But this time, I wasn't carrying coffee for anyone else. This time, my hands were empty, but not my intentions. The boardroom glass shimmered with early light. Through it, I could already see Tanya seated at the head of the table, legs crossed, polished nails tapping at her phone. Darcy leaned over, whispering something in her ear. My father, Clemens Greaves, stood at the windows, arms behind his back, pretending the skyline was more interesting than what was about to unfold. I didn't pause. I walked in, silent. Tanya looked up and smirked. "Well, look who's early. Guess charity cases know to show up on time when they're invited." Laughter rippled from Darcy and one of the junior board members, Tom. I didn't blink. I pulled out a chair near the center, smoothed my skirt, and sat down. No response. No reaction. Just presence. 2 minutes later, the glass doors opened again. Emery walked in, dressed in a navy suit, not her usual blazer and blouse. She held a sealed folder with a court insignia on the front. No briefcase, no small talk, just that folder. She placed it gently on the center of the table and took a seat beside me. Tanya eyed her, amused. "What's this? Legal show and tell?" "Let's begin," I said calmly, "with an ownership update." My father turned around slowly, cocking an eyebrow. "Ownership update?" he echoed, like the words were in a language he didn't understand. "Yes." I nodded at Emery. She opened the folder with the deliberate calm of someone who already knew how this would end. She didn't pass it around. She simply began to read. As of 2 years ago, the controlling 72% of Greaves Sutton equity was transferred to Carter D. Greaves per the irrevocable clause in the private trust of the late Odella Greaves. "Excuse me?" Tanya's chair screeched as she pushed back. "That's absurd. That clause was executed, notarized, and filed with the probate court under sealed condition due to family risk concerns," Emery continued smoothly. "The trust came into activation upon the death of Odella Greaves. It includes voting rights, asset control, and board restructuring authority." The room froze. You could have heard the second hand on my father's Rolex. Then all at once, cracks in glass. "You forged this!" Tanya hissed, pointing at the document like it was poison. Darcy shook her head, incredulous. "This is a pathetic stunt. Is this some revenge fantasy because you couldn't cut it in the real business world?" My father slammed a hand on the table, veins in his neck pulsing. "Enough! If you think we're going to sit here while you try to hijack the company—" Emery cut him off, gently, but firmly. "This isn't a discussion. It's a legal transfer of power. Recognized by the court this morning at 7:04 a.m., the injunction prevents any board decision, sale, or alteration of structure until Carter formally takes executive authority, which she is doing now." Tanya's face twisted. "You conniving little—" I reached into my tote and set a thick envelope on the table, labeled in sharp black ink, "For the State Attorney General, unopened." And beside it, The whistleblower report. All financial transfers, shell transactions, and internal communications related to the Greaves Foundation misappropriation are documented here, I said quietly. But I'd rather keep this internal, for now. Darcy went ghost white. My father leaned forward, his voice low, growling. You wouldn't. I turned to him, meeting his eyes for the first time in months. I would, and I have. I slid 2 final papers across the table. As acting controller, I'm calling for an immediate third-party forensic audit. Effective today, Tanya Sutton and Darcy Howell are placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. You will vacate your offices by 3 p.m. Security will escort you. Tanya stood so fast her chair toppled. You can't do this. You don't even understand how this company runs. You think you can just waltz in here and play CEO? I'm not playing, I said, and you're welcome to call your lawyers. I already did. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was fear, the kind that settles in when people realize they're no longer in control. Tom cleared his throat. If I may ask, Carter, is this permanent? Yes, I said simply. The era of intimidation, backdoor deals, and erasing people who disagree with you, it ends today. Tanya's voice broke. Odella would never— She did, Emery replied, and she did it to protect her legacy and her daughter. For the first time, I saw it, realization in Tanya's face. Not just that she'd lost, but that she'd underestimated me for so long she forgot I was ever capable of standing. I gathered the documents, stood, and took a deep breath. In their eyes, I'd always been disposable, but I was the signature holding the house together, and I just revoked it. As I reached the door, Tanya's voice came behind me, small, almost unfamiliar. You planned this, she whispered. I turned, one hand on the door. No, I said. I prepared for it, and then I walked out. The next morning they were gone. But the real reckoning was still waiting. At home. By 10 a.m., I was standing at the threshold of a room I hadn't dared walk into since I was 19. My father's study. The door was half cracked, but I still knocked once, out of habit, not respect. He didn't answer. Just sat there, his back turned to me, staring at the blank space on the wall above the fireplace. The place where my mother's portrait used to hang. That space had never been bare before. Not even when they were fighting. Not even after she died. You took it down yourself? I asked quietly. He didn't flinch. Didn't speak. I walked in and sat across from him. The same chair where I'd once been told I wasn't smart enough for business school, where I'd been lectured on family image while my sister got her 3rd DUI erased from the record. But today, we were at eye level. He looked older than I remembered, more gray around the ears, more sunken in the cheeks. But the cold in his eyes, still there, still sharp, still unforgiving. For a while, neither of us said a word. The clock ticked. The wind rattled a loose gutter outside. My heels pressed into the carpet, grounding me. Then finally, he spoke. You were always weak, he said flatly. Always hiding behind her, like a shadow, a follower. I tilted my head, let out a breath through my nose. And you were always hiding from her. His jaw tightened. Excuse me? You heard me, I said calmly. You never stood up to her, never challenged her, never earned her respect. So instead, you tried to control everyone else around her, including me. You thought she was too soft on me. You never saw that maybe she was just fair. His lip twitched, like a nerve was misfiring. He looked away. I reached into my folder and pulled out the final document, the one that mattered most. A single envelope, thick with legal weight. I set it down on his desk. This is the deal, I said. Resign with dignity, keep your pension, walk away clean, or fight. and I go public with the foundation's accounting files, the offshore transfers, the board emails. You'll lose the company, the house, every deal you ever brokered, your reputation." He didn't touch the paper, just stared at it like it might catch fire. After a moment, he leaned back, hands folded on his lap. "She would have hated what you've become," he said. I met his eyes. "No. She would have been proud, because I finally stopped letting you define me." That landed. I could see it. Something in his eyes cracked, just slightly. Not enough for remorse, but enough to know he finally understood I wasn't bluffing. He leaned forward, took a pen from the stand, and signed. No questions, no counter, just his name, a signature I'd seen on birthday checks and legal letters, now signing away the only power he ever really had. When he was done, he pushed the envelope toward me without looking up. "Get out!" I stood, tucked the document away, but I didn't move to the door yet. My eyes drifted to the shelf behind him, books he never read, awards he hadn't earned, and there, in the corner, a small velvet box. I walked over and opened it. Inside, my mother's old wristwatch. Silver band, worn leather, the one she'd worn when she taught me how to tell time, the one he said had been misplaced after her funeral. "She left this for me," I said softly. "Not you." He didn't argue. As I stepped out of the room, I looked back one last time. The study used to feel like a throne I could never reach. Today, it felt like a mausoleum he'd built himself, stone by stone, silence by silence. By noon, I was back at headquarters. No applause when I walked in, just quiet nods, and that meant more. Jonah had already reconnected the network and recovered 2 months' worth of buried correspondence. Emery met me in the hallway, holding 2 fresh contracts for internal restructure. Even Ms. Valencia, who'd once refused to meet my eyes, handed me a note before disappearing into the break room. In slanted handwriting, it read, "She'd be proud. We all are." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I stepped into my new office, my mother's old one, not Tanya's, not Darcy's, mine. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned, not imposed. I opened the blinds just enough to let the light in, then placed the watch on the corner of my desk. The ticking was soft, but steady. I sat down, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. No posturing, no mask, just me. But it didn't last long. Just before 2 p.m., my desk phone rang. I hesitated, then picked up. "Ms. Greaves, Romer Hale is on the line. They're requesting an urgent meeting regarding Tanya Sutton." My hand gripped the armrest. "What about her?" I asked. "She's made some moves. Secret ones." "You'll want to see this." I closed my eyes for a beat, steadying the pulse that had started to rise again. Of course she wasn't done. Of course the storm wasn't over yet. "Tell them I'll be there in 20, I said. Because what Tanya did next almost burned it all to the ground. What she'd done in secret nearly burned it all to the ground. I spent the next 2 weeks sweeping ash from corners no one thought to check. Tanya had tried to transfer intellectual property filings, our patents, brand assets, and product rights, to a holding company registered under a shell name. It wasn't just betrayal. It was scorched earth sabotage, signed behind closed doors in the last hours before she was forced to resign. If Emery hadn't caught it buried beneath layers of misnamed folders, we might have lost everything. But we didn't. And now, it was time to close it all. For good. The courthouse was tucked into the older part of the city, wrapped in stone and a kind of hush that felt too still for everything it had seen. It was late afternoon when I got there, the autumn sun slanting through the tall windows like it was cutting across time itself. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. Inside, the hearing had already begun. The room was small, deliberately quiet. No cameras, no audience, just a judge, a few board reps, legal counsel, and 2 women who had once decided I wasn't worth keeping around. Tanya sat stiff, her hair pulled back too tight like she was still pretending she had control. Darcy sat beside her, hands clenched in her lap, glancing up every few seconds like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to say this was just a misunderstanding. They didn't see me at first. I stayed near the back, out of the light, watching as their lawyers stumbled through explanations and shifting blame. Tanya's defense? I was misled by bad internal advice. Darcy's? I was just trying to protect the family legacy. I didn't know the funds were offshore. The judge wasn't impressed. No one was. Emery caught my eye from across the room and gave the smallest nod. We had receipts. $3.2 million routed through layered accounts, a clear paper trail Tanya had left behind in her panic. The court didn't need drama, just facts. When the judge finally addressed me, her tone was even, respectful but direct. Mr. Greaves, the board and legal counsel are prepared to proceed in one of 2 ways. Option 1, court-enforced liquidation with criminal charges filed. Option 2, private settlement under your authority, exclusion from future business practice, asset handover, and public silence. Emery leaned in, voice low. It's your call. Either way, you win. I looked at Tanya. Her eyes were fixed on the floor now, jaw set but trembling slightly. Darcy had stopped pretending to breathe steadily. I knew that look. The one where someone realizes the elevator cable is snapping, and there's no one to blame but themselves. I didn't speak for a moment. I just took in the room. The echo of my shoes on tile. The sting of old betrayal still clinging to my ribs. The weight of power sitting squarely in my lap. Then I said 6 words. Make it quiet. Make it final. The judge nodded. And just like that, it was done. No headlines, no spectacle, just a signature and a silence that said more than shouting ever could. I left before anyone else, didn't wait for the lawyers to pack up, or for Tanya to sneak one last glance. I didn't need anything from them anymore, not regret, not apology. Outside, the air was colder than I'd expected, the kind of cold that gets into your cuffs and doesn't ask permission. I zipped up my coat and started walking, not fast, not slow, just forward. Ms. Valencia was standing under a tree by the edge of the lot, wrapped in her old burgundy scarf. She'd always been quiet, always precise. When she saw me, she gave a faint smile. You didn't have to come, I said. She shrugged, stepping closer. You didn't have to forgive them. I exhaled through my nose, tired but not bitter. I didn't. I just chose not to drag them through the mud. That's different. She nodded like she understood. I looked up at the sky, low clouds drifting like they had somewhere else to be. It would rain soon, probably. Take care of yourself, Ms. Valencia. You too, Mr. Greaves. And then we parted ways. The drive back to the estate was quiet. No music, just the low hum of tires on road and the occasional shift in the engine as the hills rose and fell beneath me. When I got home, I didn't go straight to my room. I went to hers. The old chair by the window hadn't moved. The cushion still had the faint indent of how she used to sit, always slightly off-center, legs crossed just once at the ankle. I lowered myself into it slowly, like easing into a memory. Her journal was where I'd left it. Thin, bound in green linen, filled with pages pressed flat with time and care. She didn't write much, just short notes, observations, reminders, page after page of quiet strength. And then, on the last one, if they ever break you, Carter, remember, you're the one they needed. Not the other way around. I closed the book, thumb resting on the edge for a long while. She'd known, Long before any of this, she saw what they tried to erase, and she trusted me to survive it. I stood, stretched, and walked to the fireplace. The space above it had stayed bare long enough. Her portrait had been stored in the back closet, wrapped in canvas, framed in walnut. I lifted it gently, brushing dust from the edge before hanging it in its rightful place, not as a shrine, but as a line, a boundary, not a relic of grief, but a quiet declaration. This space now answers to truth. The company lives, the name lives, but the era of pretense? That died the day I stopped playing along. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge. Just the ability to walk through my own home and not feel like I owed anyone an explanation for being here. For years, I stayed silent when they raised their voices. Now, I just raised a document, and they fell quiet. Do you think I was too quiet for too long? Maybe. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And when you finally speak, let it be the sentence that ends the chapter.